Hey guys, good morning and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to PWiC Summit session on building role models in the digital future. My name is Mariam and I'm your moderator for this session. To briefly introduce myself, I'm currently based in Toronto and work as marketing manager for one of the biggest data and analytics companies here. I'm also Toronto chapter lead for Pakistani Women in Computing, who's a co-sponsor for this event. Just to take you through the flow of today's event, we have dedicated 10 minutes for speaker introductions, 35 minutes for discussions, 15 minutes for Q&A. And you guys can post your questions, comments, suggestions in the chat box. It should be somewhere on the screen. And then there's one more thing I want to share with you guys about our speakers and the presenters here. We are all present in our personal capacity. And any opinions, any personal views that we share are not representative of our professional associations. And yeah, so moving on to speaker introductions, we have two excellent speakers from the industry, Rahman and Tian Lee. Aman works as a data engineer at Dockers, and Tian is head of business analytics at one of the data analytics companies in Toronto. So I would let Aman introduce herself first in full detail. So Aman, please go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mariam. Happy to be here. And thank you to Pakistani Women in Computing for having me as well. I work as a senior data engineer at Docker and basically lead their entire business intelligence and engineering team. So, which means I kind of provide analytics support for the entire company, ranging from product, HR, engineering to finance. So it's a bunch of hats that I need to wear on a daily basis. And I grew up in Pakistan, born and raised. Went to the US in 2014. I'm currently in Canada and I can't make it to the US because of H-1B issues, but I kind of hop between Toronto and San Francisco.
Great, good to hear that. Amazing. And the next person who's going to go ahead with this introduction is Tian. So Tian, over to you.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Tian Lee. I have a decade of experience in a variety of data capacities, large and small. I always joke that I was employee number 75 at one point in my life and employee number 75,000 at another point. So I kind of have a very broad spectrum of how data operations, analytics, AI works in a variety of sizes of companies. And trust me, it is very different and very interesting to see the dynamics and how the industry has changed over the last 10 years or so.
Great, awesome. So just throwing the first question towards you guys for this session, which is what motivated you to choose a career in data and analytics? Aman, you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mariam. So I had been kind of dabbling into data, first of all, at LUMS, where I used to work for the Technology and People Initiative. And that's when I eventually kind of started looking at, data pertaining to judicial courts in Pakistan. That was, I think, my first kind of interaction with data sets. And then at MIT, my thesis was on transparency reporting by tech companies. So what they deal with, like government requests. So I was looking into a lot of wiretap data and whatnot. So while I was kind of, going through all of that and analyzing data and going through Python and, visualization tools, that's when I kind of realized that I had an knack for it and I kind of enjoyed doing it.
Awesome. So that was the starting point for you?
That was the starting point.
Awesome. And Tian, what about you?
Yeah, I have a very interesting start to the data analytics world. I'm a huge basketball fan. And as a child, what I actually did was I built statistical models to predict the outcome of basketball games, not for gambling purposes, but just to see if there is some mathematical rhyme and reason to why teams win, why teams lose, and things like that. And I did some consulting work for NBA teams in the Professional Basketball Association here.
Right. So did you guys always knew that this is going to be your career, or when was this realization, or did it just emerge in like while you were studying, you guys thought that, okay, this is interesting, I'm going to take this up? When did that realization really came that I'm going to make a career in data sciences or data engineering? I mean, you can go first.
Yeah, I can go first. So it's funny because I was into a lot of detective fiction growing up and ended up reading Dan Brown's Digital Fortress in 9th grade and realized, so the protagonist was from MIT and she was a cryptographer. I was like, that's what I want to do in life. I want to crack codes. I want to build encryption algorithms, do all of that. And kind of dabbled in a lot of network security, computer security at LUMS, and then privacy policy at MIT. But then eventually I started hitting roadblocks because I was a Pakistani citizen. I couldn't have the clearance that a US citizen did. My advisor was Obama's advisor on privacy
Wow.
policy. So I couldn't go with him to congressional hearings. So that was, I think, a bit of a damper on my plans. And then the scope didn't really seem too much in Pakistan at the time. We didn't really have any internet policy and stuff. So then I guess eventually what ended up happening, a few people that I knew at Al Jazeera were building a new data team for the Digital AJ Plus initiative. And they kind of, invited me on board. And I had never really kind of thought about myself as a data engineer or an analyst. But that was so when they gave me like a technical assignment to kind of look into and then do that as part of my interview process, I realized it was actually kind of fun and I was good at it. So then I was like, might as well just do it. So it was a trial period at first, just, trying to start that off. I did it for a year. And then eventually moved over to Docker, which I also enjoy a lot. It's been a great experience. It was primarily accidental. But I think I'm glad to be in it now. I think data is
so is the case for all of us, right?
Lots of accidents and coincidences, but I think at the end of the day, your life kind of turns out to look like this amazing thing that you never really planned. So I think that's where I'm at right now.
Amazing. Tian, you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of those also accidental data scientists, so to speak. So when I actually graduated from a business school, and I just happened to have a background in SQL programming from my high school days doing consulting for basketball teams. I never thought of myself as a data engineer, but as you work your first couple of jobs, you realize that the data is the new oil in terms of this is how companies create value now. And it's the easiest way for a young person entering an industry that's so young and fresh and exciting to create immediate impact, right? It's not an industry where all the senior decisions are made by people with 20 years experience, right? So I get inspired every time I speak at my alumni network. What is considered the baseline for analytics now? What was analytics 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I graduated is child's play by now. And every couple of years, the bar is set higher and higher, which is why I think for a young person entering the field, it's a great field because you can be an expert within 5 years because the code that you're using 10 years ago is automated and easy now. So I think it's a great transition, and I love the fact that I'm leading up a very diverse data analytics team globally now.
Awesome, great. So like we know that it was an accidental approach for you, both of you guys. Do you think there was someone you always looked up to who inspired you to, pursue these careers, or any strong inspiration in your lifetime that that motivated you to take these careers up?
Yeah, I can go ahead first. I think for me, the biggest push that I got was from the faculty members at LUMS, in particular, this one professor, Dr. Fareed Zafar. I had never planned on applying to grad school, and he was the one who kind of had that faith in me and pushed me into it. And, I attribute a lot of my successes to him as well for pushing me there on. And right now, he's still one of the first people that I go to for advice whenever I'm working on something or need advice on something. And we generally don't have a lot of female in tech role models, or at least we didn't like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Now we see so many women working, at awesome places in the US.
Yeah.
I think one of the people that I first kind of encountered when I moved to the US was Dr. Rana Dajani. She's a molecular biologist based out of the Middle East. And, it was nice to kind of see a Muslim woman, hold her head high, giving a talk at MIT as a PhD. I think that really, really kind of inspired me because before that, I didn't really have too many female role models. But generally in my everyday life, I try to surround myself with friends who I feel are much better than me in terms of their character and just in terms of being better humans. So I try to look up to them, and they don't belong to tech. They belong to like architecture and design and a variety of different careers in journalism. But it's just good to have that kind of variety around me all the time.
I completely agree with that. It's, I think, one of the lacking on our parts that our society, when you come from Pakistan, we don't have a lot of role models to look up to. And the ones that we have are mostly male role models because the structure of the society is in a way where a lot of females don't pursue careers in high tech or high job requirements functions. But it's great that it's changing and more people are taking up careers in tech. So Tian, what was it for you like?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started working, this idea of AI and analytics was very much a academic thought. So as in, when I say, oh, I'm in analytics, this was, 8, 9, 10 years ago, people would assume that I'm working for the university. So I kind of started at the infancy of this whole digitization of analytics, like, people hiring huge analytics teams. So that being said, what really inspired me, my first couple bosses, they're very good at one thing. They really preach the idea of evidence-based decision-making. So what that really means is, I'm sure we all watch Mad Men, where some guy has a brilliant idea and says, do it, blue envelope versus red envelope and things like that. So what really is, really these transformative leaders who are leading up AI teams and data teams in the early days, I had two bosses, not going to name their names, but they're very focused on evidence-based decision-making. They really appreciate that you're applying the right methodology versus getting the right result. And that was really transformative in the early days of analytics, where I call it, it was insight hunting in the very beginning. Please tell me what I don't know about something, versus appreciating the methodology and evaluating your work based on, did you apply the right methodology with the right amount of rigor, which was very different from typical industry back 10 years ago. And I really appreciate that. That's kind of what inspired me to continue on the path of data analytics and AI.
Cool. Yeah, that is true. Also, Eamon, I agree with the fact that since that is one of the challenge for Pakistan, that we don't have a lot of female role models. Throughout your career, do you feel, and today as well, do you feel there were some challenges that existed then and still exist, and how do you cope up with those challenges?
Yeah, I think data engineering still doesn't get as much respect from software engineers as I think we do deserve. Yeah. Initially, when I was stepping into data engineering, a lot of my friends who were software engineers would say, why do you really want a career in data? Why don't you just do solid software engineering? It's more stable. So I think that's one of the things that I do feel, that there is a perception in the industry that, data is like soft software engineering. Whereas when software engineers actually end up doing data stuff, they do get frustrated. Normally, I think there is a perception to kind of treat databases or the cloud environment or the pipelines as, okay, fine, we'll build on that eventually. But they don't really spend as much time doing that. So I think that's one of the perceptions that I do feel that I had. But the fact that data engineering kind of brings together a lot of disciplines as well. You can potentially be a biologist or a chemist or whatever, and then play around with data sets and eventually come and make it into data analytics. I feel software engineering doesn't really have as much flexibility in terms of backgrounds, even though I feel education itself is changing. Now with COVID, that's even more pronounced, that there's so many ways to kind of just be able to consume education online. But I think that's one of the challenges that we do face. And Tian mentioned that, the industry is growing and there's so much happening. But I also feel at times do feel overwhelmed, because there is this danger that we might get too siloed out in a particular area. So let's say if I'm going into analytics, I'm going to another substream of analytics. So I do feel that there's a danger there. And at the same time, I also do worry about job security, right? So if everything is being automated, what does that kind of leave for data engineering? There's so many startups and companies that are trying to integrate systems together and build the pipelines. So you don't need someone to kind of draw your schemas out for you, normalize your database designs, because you have a tool that does that for you. So I feel that the role itself is evolving, and maybe within the next few years, the data engineering role might disappear and maybe be replaced by something like a data architect or something different that kind of involves choosing the right tooling for you, but not as much as coding it all out. I don't know, Tian might have views on this. So
I'm sure Tian has a lot of views. So Tian, throwing the same question to you, what were some challenges that you faced in the start and still we deal with them, and what are the challenges that you feel the industry faces as well?
Absolutely. To piggyback off of what was said, I think you're correct. So when I say, it's really easy for a young person to get started and make an immediate impact in the data analytics and data engineering field, it's a double-edged sword. The reason why you can make an impact is because every couple of years, what used to be groundbreaking work is no longer groundbreaking, right? And, this is an industry where for people with an academic mind, it's really interesting because you're never stuck doing the same thing twice. I joke to my employees all the time, if you make the same report 3 times, it can be automated. Please do something else. Especially in today's day and age, that is what really pushes us. That being said, in terms of challenges, that's a good segue, because you really do need to have a mentality of what was good a year ago, 2 years ago is no longer good enough, and always push. So that's, I guess a challenge. Challenge could be good or bad. Some people take it as, intellectually exciting. Some people take it as job security. But I think for people who have that academic mind to really want to push the envelope, I think it's a great, exciting opportunity. In terms of other challenges, I think part of it, and I say this in a lot of my talks, what's really missing in the industry, and when you think about why AI adoption is slower than many people think, right? I mean, 10 years ago, people wrote books that everything will be AI by now. I think it's a part of what I think is missing is the data evangelism. So what I mean by that is lots of people pretend to know about analytics, and they really want to leverage the AI, but they're still a little bit stuck in their old ways where they don't fully trust the AI. And as long as you try to manually intervene with something that's artificial, the results may not be what you expect. And so I think part of that is, as data leaders, educating both your internal folks in your companies as well as your clients on what really is AI. Because I think data analytics and AI is only as powerful as the questions you ask it. If you ask it simple questions, you're gonna get simple answers. If you ask very articulate, concise, complicated questions, your guys will spend 6 months working on it to give you an answer and give you the right level of rigor. So I think part of the evangelism is getting the executive level folks to ask the right questions and better questions. And that's really what's going to unlock the power of their oil, in this case, which is data.
That's so true. That's so true. And while we were talking about automation, I still remember Tian telling me that, Mariam, you are working on digital marketing and soon your job will be taken away. So that is one thing I still remember. But yeah, coming back to the fact that how do you guys see the industry growing in the future? We identified the challenges, but how do you see it's growing? What track it's taking and how people are navigating their careers over here? So, Aman, you can go first.
Yeah, I think COVID has been a great example that kind of basically getting everyone to look into their analytics. So even if it's a small store owner, knowing, well, how many people do I normally get in a month, or, stuff like that, trying to plan around with data based on, what's been happening in the past. I think it is now going to push everyone to at least know something about their customers. And as retail changes as well, travel is changing, everything is changing right now. But we need the data to be able to inform decisions and make the entire experience for the customer better. So I feel this is going to lead to a lot of, smaller businesses needing analytics support. And while I do feel that in Pakistan, we do a lot of work in providing services to customers abroad, I think we need to start developing analytics products out of the box that provide analytics to support to smaller companies so that they're able to answer the key questions. I mean, there is definitely a common set of questions that every business wants to know depending on their industry. So having that sort of out of the box available to them, I think there's going to be a lot of scope in that. And generally speaking, I think the seriousness with which now people will actually look at analytics is what's going to be a game changer here now. And if we were to channelize the resources, because in Pakistan, we have the advantage of keeping costs lower as compared with, let's say, North America. Yeah. So using that to kind of pivot into the analytics industry and try to provide solutions to companies abroad, I think is going to be a great game changer for analytics within Pakistan.
And is there a specific area where you see these businesses growing, or are you talking about all verticals?
I'd say all verticals, but looking into, let's say, fleets and looking into management, looking into perhaps even right now with health analytics is going to be huge, right? The fact that everyone needed data right now with COVID, it's something everyone is looking at, everyone screens. I think a lot of companies recently that I deal with in terms of data analytics and warehousing support was providing COVID-related data within the platform so that companies are able to correlate how COVID kind of affected them and impacted them. So I think really depending on what sort of industries kind of go forth, I feel cloud, sorry, I think I cut out for a second there, but I think cloud-enabled industries are doing really well. What we do notice is that the major hit that happened was travel and customer-facing interactions, and those industries were impacted the most. But in terms of tech-to-tech, B2B, we're talking about developers engaging with apps online in the cloud. I feel that is going to continue growing, and as more and more businesses kind of go online, analytics support everywhere is, I think, going to be major.
Great, got it. So Tian, what about you?
I think this is an interesting topic, and I think about this quite often. I think what's happening in the last 10 years is we had a first wave of data engineering, let's call it. Let's put all of our data together, warehouse it correctly, have the right context. And then about 5-6 years ago, at least in the Canadian market, companies started calling everybody a data scientist and hiring people with data science backgrounds, which is totally okay. So that's what has happened up till now. And I think companies recently have started to separate the two, because what I really think of data science is applying statistical rigor to data. And what I think of data engineering is, how do we make sure the data is correct? How do we know the interpretations are correct and it's warehoused correctly? So I think companies are trying to separate out the two activities, because it really takes a different mindset for people to work in those two fields. So I think for people entering the industry, let's not all just think about the data science part, because that's the flashy one that all the job titles have now. But companies are trying to slowly realize that the underlying data is just not there, and the warehousing is so important. But they've been trying to hire data scientists to work on bad data, right? As you say, garbage in, garbage out, and there's not enough data engineers to really clean up the garbage, have the right context to provide for the AI folks to be able to do their magic, so to speak.
Great. Yeah, I agree with that fact totally, that a lot of people, when they start off their careers, they think that it's a fancy job. They look at the titles that they get, but they do not know how this is going to navigate in the future. So that brings me to my next question, which is how can more techies pursue a career in data analytics, and what's going to be your advice or guidance to these guys?
Yeah, I'll just kind of add on to what Tian said. It's funny how once, I think a bunch of my class, we were sitting together, this is while we were kind of well into our careers then, and someone was like, is it just me, or am I spending too much time cleaning data? I just feel like 80% of my time is just cleaning data. And we all realized we actually have the same problem. And we're like, well, this is not really fun most of the time. But I think once you have the clear data and people are actually getting insights out of it, I think it's just so powerful. Seeing people every day that I work with, and they're able to make such interesting insight out of the data, out of the entire developer experience on the Docker platform, I think it is very powerful. And so, but generally in terms of techies pursuing data and analytics as a career, I think first is what Tian is saying as well. We need to treat it as its own discipline. It's away from computer science. Within that, data science is very different from data engineering. I appreciate data science, but I know I can never be a data scientist, because
why don't you just
it doesn't
go
appeal
ahead
to
and
me
define
as much.
this for our audience right now?
Sure, I think Tian kind of put it better than I would, but data engineering is more to do with providing your data from source to destination, cleaning it up in a way that data analysts and scientists can then use to kind of derive insights for them. So making sure that the data quality is accurate, making sure that the data is consumable, making sure that the data is just free of errors, and that you can fetch it regularly, on a consistent basis, and that there are no drop-offs in the data. So there are no leaky buckets, so stuff like that. I'm sure Tian would probably want to revise my definition a little, but I'd say that's like the major difference. Whereas data science more has to do with statistics, with the math element of it, and then applying, let's say, confidence intervals to your analysis. So I'd say it's the more mathematical part of data engineering. I mean, not data engineering, of data itself. And then analytics is probably somewhere in the middle, where you're trying to derive at least raw basic insights and not maybe perhaps go into predictive capabilities. So that's, I think, more for what data scientists would eventually do. But generally, people who are kind of coming into data and analytics as a career, I would recommend, well, first figuring out where do you stand? What are you, a data scientist? What appeals to you more? And then maybe even kind of trying to take out a bunch of data sets. There's so many online data sets that are available. Data.world is one resource that you can plug into. I'd say maybe even have an experience of a visualization tool. Go into Google Data Studio or Looker, Power BI, Tableau. There's so many out there. But try to at least pick something from each way across the pipeline. So if you want to maybe look into a cloud solution, try to put your pipelines on Jenkins, for instance, or Airflow. So just try to instrument your pipelines. But if the engineer doesn't appeal to you, well, look into the data science of it. Take existing data sets and see what you want to do with those. And then there's also a key component of databases that's there. Tian mentioned warehousing. Making yourself kind of more comfortable with a database, with SQL. So I think those are things that you need to pick up, the breadcrumbs across the journey, and then realize what appeals to you the most, and then specialize in that.
Yeah.
And then if you're
some great resources. Sorry,
of course. No, I was just saying, and for students who are kind of looking into it, just try to get more and more data analysis and try to put that as part of your portfolio, whether it's on GitHub or elsewhere. Do some data storytelling, publish your results on LinkedIn. I saw a bunch of, I think, Pakistani students doing results on COVID and within Pakistan, putting the data sets out there and their analysis, which was pretty nice to see as well.
Of course, yeah, definitely saw those, and I was totally impressed. Tian, what do you think? What is the guidance from Tian about pursuing career in data analytics?
I think it's a great, like my personal career, I like to think of a data journey. So we start at the very base layer, which is warehousing and ETL type stuff. So that's extract, transform, load, to take things from one database to another using ODBC connections and things like that. And really going from that part to the descriptive analytics, which is what happened in the past, describe it with analytics, to where we are now in the industry, where it's more predictive analytics. How can we leverage the past to predict something in the future? And I think this is where the holy grail of the value creation is. So that being said, for a young person, never lose sight of the process. While you may be working in data warehousing, never lose sight of what your work should amount to in the end, right? Because you're part of a huge data ecosystem. Never lose sight of that. And I see a lot of young people fall into this trap where they become what I call language kings and queens. They're very good at C++, or they're very good at Python, and they realize, Tian, why am I not advancing in my career? And my general advice after speaking to them is, oh, it's because you pigeonholed yourself as someone who just codes and is good at a language, versus really having that holistic view of why do we do these analysis? What are some other ways we can think about the problems? And the biggest part that's missing for a lot of language kings and queens is the storytelling, the data storytelling. How do you convince somebody who's not as data savvy as you, right? You can't just send them a spreadsheet and be like, the numbers look great. So it's really bridging that gap and being a storyteller, and the word I keep using is evangelist. How do you evangelize the idea of data science to people who are not so savvy, right? Because if data scientists, all they do is report to the senior data scientist, their work doesn't get out. It's about empowering everyone in the data science field to be able to sell the story, which rooted in evidence, of course. So don't get caught up in languages. What was popular and advanced 10 years ago is not as popular now. So always never losing sight of the context of what you're doing is super important as you move into more of a leadership role, if that's what you want to do.
Right. That makes sense, totally. So what would be an advice from you guys to someone who's working on an international project and is a software engineer or a developer or in business analytics? Like if we talk in terms of ethics or how to take this project up and deal with an international clientele, what would be the tips or guidance for that? You can go first.
Go ahead first. I think what we really need to do is, I see a lot of startups in Pakistan working with international clients. So if you're an engineer, I think, if you're comfortable talking to your manager about being able to showcase what you've done in front of the customer, developing that confidence, first maybe sitting in and observing how those meetings are carried out, will kind of help you give the confidence of not only dealing with that one customer, but generally more and more customers internationally in your career as well. Because in order to have sort of an international career, you don't need to physically leave Pakistan. You can have all of that. Because, we are now, Pakistan is one of the emerging economies, and there's so much going on in terms of the startup ecosystem. So just putting yourself in front of the client, showcasing your work, just being very ethical about what you're doing. Let's say even if you spend extra hours doing something, but to deliver the solution that the client initially asked for, instead of overcharging them, just trying to be very mindful and having empathy for the final customer, and not trying to kind of cut corners just to kind of fit the box with the solution and not really solve the problem. So I think those are some of the things that we really need to focus on in delivering value, so that the customer wants to keep coming back to you again and again, because they know that you're going to deal with the problem and not with, let's say, the proposed solution, but rather solve the problem for them. So I think having that, and just general professionalism. I think sometimes we do have a problem of kind of being too egotistical. I think kind of checking your ego back in the door and dealing with customers in a better manner, not dealing with, let's say, having a bad attitude, because unfortunately, some of the things that have come up in my conversations with people who've dealt with Pakistani companies before is a lack of professionalism, where they feel that they're not being taken seriously, or their problem is not being kind of given the attention that it deserves. So I think just kind of dealing with that and just kind of being available for the customer, I think is super important.
Just a slight add to the question, and then I'll jump to Tian. Why do you think, what is that these software engineers or these people are doing on their projects, which translate into an energy that people feel that they're not professional? Any observations that you have had?
So I think some of the observations that I've had is like not kind of frequently communicating what's going on, not having the transparency. So let's say you just disappear for 2 weeks and you kind of tell the client, oh, your solution will be ready in 2 weeks. But then you give them something which perhaps is half-baked or not what they initially asked for. So not having enough follow-up, not setting clear communication, not kind of giving the entire feedback loop, telling the customer that we've clearly understood what is required, and building out the solution, perhaps even in terms of, let's say, perception-wise, building that in the customer so that they know exactly what is to be expected of the solution. So I feel that in terms of communication, we need to be very clear, open, transparent, and just having more empathy for the customer, and not just dealing with them as another dollar contract coming in.
Yeah, true, definitely. And do you think it's because of our culture that sometimes we feel that we understand the problem, but we really don't? Or and the entire question or entire discussion is lost between different cultures, and that's where the gap in communication comes? Or what do you think it is?
It could definitely be a cultural issue, I think. But then I think it would also be like overconfidence and just assuming that we know what the customer is asking for, rather than, truly looking into the problem and kind of being in their shoes, understanding the problem itself. But I think there's definitely a cultural gap, which I don't think is something that can't be bridged. I mean, so many Pakistani students come to North America every year, are able to integrate really well. So I think it's just about putting a little more care into the relationship as opposed to just the engineering bits of it.
And also, sorry, I'm just probing you with this.
I know, but
I want to understand the problem here. So do you think is it because of lack of exposure, or is it just general oversight in the culture?
It could be, well, it could be both. I don't want to say too many things because, I clearly haven't been in those situations. And it's usually other people kind of coming to me and saying, well, we've worked with Pakistani professionals before, but we're probably going to go to India instead, because which is not good. We don't want that, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all, I think, so one of my bosses at Al Jazeera used to say that all of the coding talent in the world is in South Asia. And, you guys are awesome. And I feel that we need to kind of tap into that and just be more mindful. I'm saying this because I know that at least, there are Pakistani developers out there who might be listening in right now. And it's something that, shouldn't really be hidden. And it is kind of an elephant in the room. And I want that to kind of, come across forth. But, more in terms of, I really care about developers in Pakistan. And for us to be able to, become like a world-class sort of, data as well as software engineering kind of hub. So for that, I think these are some of the problems that we do kind of need to deal with and put in front and actually deal with them purposefully.
Great. I completely agree with you. And I have had some similar observations, but I also know that Pakistanis are really hardworking. And sometimes it's just the cultural aspect which translates in a different way when we are communicating. So we just need to be on top of our communications. So that's a good feedback for everyone who's watching our session. Then Tian, what do you think? Because you have also managed a lot of resources offshore and dealt with people. So what is one advice from your side for people working with international clientele from Pakistan?
Absolutely. Having worked with a very diverse team in Pakistan in my career, one of the cultural things I think will really help them internationally is despite who is the customer, you are partners in this. This is not a transactional relationship, right? Just because, he's the person paying you and he says, please make X for me, does not mean that you don't have room to push back. And I think that's a cultural thing, because I think as Pakistan grows in terms of its aptitude to be a power internationally, we have to stop thinking of things as transactions, right? If you think about the 90s, what happened with IT, submit a ticket, I answered the ticket and solved the basic question, letter for letter, within 24 hours, and you get a gold star. I think in today's economy, that's not good enough. You have to also, because look, you are the analytics expert, you know the data better than the client. So I think what they're looking to do, I mean, maybe they don't overtly ask for it, is for you to provide solutions, not just execute on something that they write down, right? And that's one of them. And the second one is how to work internationally. Is I think a lot of international clients, my personal experience being American, Canadian, and the UK mostly, is predicting the level one question. So if a client asks you for something and you make it, and the result looks, I don't know, not what you expect, always be able to answer those level one, level two questions and predict what those questions are, because it really helps reinforce that you've thought about the problem, not just done the transaction of tell me X by X, right? That's the very basic analytic stuff. To really say, okay, here's X by X and here's what it means, and here's what I double check to make sure that there's X number of people doing this is correct. Don't contextualize that for the client, right? Because I think that's what's really missing. I know it's different from the days of submit a JIRA ticket and I've done something letter for letter. They really want you to manage the process throughout. And I think that's what's really gonna elevate the status of the Pakistani workforce, and be able to ask those questions and be real partners in the relationship versus just I execute on what you tell me to do.
Great, yeah, I completely agree with that. So Aman, sorry, I'm pronouncing the name wrong throughout the session. I'm so sorry about this.
You're fine, don't worry.
Aman, so what is one thing that you see different about Pakistani talent? This is a trick question, so I'm this is out of course for you guys. But what is that one thing that you see in Pakistani talent and you see that it's very differentiating from all other cultures, and you think people can definitely cash on this and build their careers if they just optimize or if they just work on that particular skill?
I think the hard work and dedication is definitely something that's there within, all of the people I've worked with before in Pakistan. And that's something that, I feel like the entire rigorous Pakistani education system eventually kind of drills that in us, that we're very resilient. And I think that resiliency will really kind of pay forward. So I think just people putting in hard work, even if you don't see results immediately, just kind of letting that take you, go forth. And I've seen people's lives transform. And just from pure hard work and not getting distracted by other things that might be bothering them and the world around them. So I think just remaining focused, dedicated, and hard work throughout. And I think those are the things that we excel in the most.
Completely. So our audience that is listening, please take notes and work on it. Tian, what do you think?
So one thing I noticed with my Pakistani colleagues, number one, like Aman said, is the hardworkingness. And the second one I think is a little bit underappreciated, is ability to compartmentalize. So what I mean by that is, in today's day and age, you're really working on one project at once. And that I've seen a great ability to say, I'm doing really well on one project and not so well on another one, but not let that mood bleed into other projects, right? I think that is a level of professionalism I think I'm really impressed with, which is, you're working on multiple things at once. You can't be emotional about your whole life, because when you're working on a specific project, it's very important to say, let's dedicate myself to that specific project, versus being more emotional, which is what people in North America tend to be more, right? They're more like, well, am I having a bad day and not a bad day? And I think being able to compartmentalize and say, I need to do well on this project, even though something is not going well on another project. And I think that's very underappreciated and very valuable in today's economy.
Good observation. Yeah. So the next, we actually have 4 minutes until, not 4 minutes, just 1 minute until we go to our question answers. There are some questions here, but yeah. So I would want to know what is that thing you guys are working on right now, and that makes you really excited about your job? Aman, again, you can go first.
Thanks. So I can't go into too many details, but in November, Docker kind of sold off most of the enterprise business. So now we're just focused on developers. So I think what's been really nice is to, just with a smaller team, to be able to look at the entire developer experience for our millions of users who are using Docker right now in their deployments. So trying to kind of reduce the pain points that people have in terms of their onboarding experience, so that Docker can deliver value to you immediately when you sign up. It's quicker to learn. It's quicker for you to be able to see the effects that it has on your developer cycle. So I think that's something I'm very excited about. And obviously can't go into too many details, but there's a
Of
lot
course.
happening within Docker just to kind of optimize the experience for the developer and not the enterprise. So I think that's really exciting. Being a developer myself, I think it's the right way to go, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Awesome, great. Tian, I would change the question for you a bit. So I don't want to know what you're currently working on because I know you cannot share a lot of details about your organization.
I'm actually.
But apart from that, if you're working on some great project on the side and want to share with us, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, what I do 9 to 5 is just a job, right? I actually like to think of myself as part of the bigger analytics community in Toronto and in Canada in general. One of the things I'm really big on, I come from a very strong alumni network, is mentoring AI startups to really, what really gets me going is seeing all these brilliant ideas and, just not being able to monetize. And that's the issue with a lot of our industry is how do we increase adoption and monetize it? Because there's lots of great ideas out there, lots of brilliant code, and lots of brilliant ideas for a product, but how do you really monetize that? And I think I work with certain organizations within the Toronto tech community, and I really help mentor. I mean, to the best of my ability, just having worked at startups and that leverage data and AI, and how do they really make money from it, right? Because there's lots of let's call it funds in Canadian society to get you started, but not a lot of resources to help you say, great, you've developed a great product. How do you market that? How do you monetize that that great work? And I think that's what really gets me going sometimes, being a part of panels like this, and also for the Toronto startup community to really, help people along, right? And really deliver the power of analytics and unlocking the power of analytics and data for companies.
Perfect. Great. So the next question is, what is your favorite moment or memory from your career?
Me first. So it's not particularly to do with analytics per se, but when I joined Docker, I remember, so being a Muslim woman, I was like, in case you haven't noticed, I went to the head of HR and told them, in case you haven't noticed by now, I'm Muslim and I need to pray, and I need a small space to pray at about twice a day. So is there something you can help me out with? And then, they were like, sure, Aman, we'll get on it right now. We'll convert one of the rooms into a prayer room. And do you want mood lighting in there? What can we do for you? It was very sweet. And then within a week, the HR came to me and they're like, Aman, we made a prayer room for you. And we have a yoga mat in there. I have never prayed on a yoga mat before, but I just found it to be so sweet.
That was thoughtful.
And then, in that sense, I felt, and then they found out that there were other people who'd been praying inside closets within the office. They invite them to use the room as well. So I felt that it wasn't just for myself, but for every other, let's say, identifiably Muslim or practicing Muslim who would join the company would be able to use that. I think just kind of not only thinking about yourself, but everyone else you're going to be helping whenever you take a step forward. I think I just saw the magic in that. So that was amazing.
Was really cute for sure. Tian, what about you?
Yeah, actually, mine would be a little bit more academic.
Amen on this.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more academically driven. I still remember this, and it's on my resume. As one of the things I've done is I've at a certain telecom that I worked at before. I was able to change the way they think about marketing through analytics. What I mean by that is, in a typical marketing database marketing firm, you say, okay, you spend more money on the customers who are your best customers, right? It sounds pretty good, right? Like if you spend $100 and Aman spends $10 a month, I want to spend more marketing dollars towards the $100 customer. So what I really did was I actually was able to change the paradigm of marketing in general, because what we realize is, if you go back to the drawing board and say, why do we market to people? Well, at the heart of it, it's to generate incremental revenue. Right. So what I really found was, okay, we should actually be spending more money on the people paying less because there's more upside. So that really was a big paradigm shift at this telco, which is it's about incrementality of your spend, not just spend more money on good people. And I'm very proud of that. And I think, that's the way they, I still keep in contact with former colleagues there. And that's the way they use it now. And actually, I got a text from a former colleague about 2 weeks ago that says, we still have code with your name and your notes in it that we finally, still can't get rid of, because that's the foundation of the paradigm shift of marketing in that company.
That's great. Awesome. Yeah. So I was looking for some questions on our chat, and people want to connect with us on LinkedIn. Definitely, we're going to share our LinkedIn profiles. Probably going to post it on the pages that we are live on right now. Aman, it's your LinkedIn profile that most people are asking for. So we're going to do it right after this session. But if you guys have any other questions, please post it, and we would definitely ask Aman and Tian about it. I have one question here, which is, were there any resources or any tools that you have used throughout your career that gave you the confidence to, move forward and be successful?
Other than stackoverflow.com. So I think what really excites me is how people who are, let's say, in similar roles or using the same technology kind of are developing their own pipeline. So I think right now, I think we have a unique advantage of a lot of these tech conferences now being open to everyone. So I think just being able to look at what other people are doing with the same tool set or different tools solving the same problems, I think is super powerful. A lot of companies have very good engineering blogs. I think that are definitely worth recommending. And just kind of looking into, what are people doing with data in terms of, let's say, whether it's New York Times or somewhere else, finding like good resources where data storytelling is happening. I think that also kind of paints a picture that there is some smart engineering happening behind that as well. So I think that'll be from my side.
So these were like the advice for professionals, but if somebody is just new and starting off their career, what are some resources that you want to share?
So I'd say HackerRank is really good for problems. So once you're starting off, let's say with languages or SQL, just solving a lot of problems. I think that's super important. Data.world I've mentioned before, lots of data sets to kind of play around with. Again, so many different online platforms for online learning and certificates. Definitely recommend those. Won't name any courses, but happy to if anyone's looking for anything specific, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to share.
Perfect. Tian, your input on this question?
Yeah, so I mean, everything Aman said is totally correct. And some other sources I think really inspired me early in my career is never be afraid to ask other people for code on projects you're not working on, just to understand how there's different ways to code for the same problem, possibly more efficient, but it's really inspiring to see how people solve problems. And the one other one is, since it's COVID, it's a very, very interesting example I always say is actually click on the references. So anytime you see a news article that cites anything stats related, any reputable source will have the white papers linked to say which data scientist did it and what is their conclusion, and understanding their methodology, right? And that really gives you a good sense of what are some common techniques being used to isolate for certain things. For example, are they using clustering? Are they using isolation forests? Like, what are the common statistical tools so that you can pare down the specific topics you want to learn and go to those resources like Aman mentioned, right? Because what you can easily find out what's popular in the industry by clicking those little superscript 1s and 2s and 3s on the news articles. It will usually have very good statistically driven white papers behind them.
Right, great. These are some incredible tips for our audience. I'm sure they're taking notes about that. So I would also want to know, how do you guys approach a difficult problem? Or how do you guys solve for bugs? Or if you were ever caught up in a career or a project where you were thrown a question where you couldn't handle and you were totally frustrated, how do you navigate through those situations, or how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just about stepping back. There's a joke in the company that Aman just sleeps on it and the solution happens, which is not true. But I think it's just about, just stepping away from the problem. I find whiteboards just magical, just trying to draw the problem entirely out on the board in front of you, maybe having someone else go over it with you, and then solving it piece by piece. I think early on in my career, I used to get very overwhelmed with just say one big problem and then just leave it all together, or think of a solution and then become my first critic and just kind of tearing it apart. So I think dealing with things piece by piece, solving some portions out before you get to the entire holistic picture, I think is super important.
Tian, what's your approach?
So in terms of problems and bugs, usually I try to isolate what the bug is, because oftentimes in my mind, I'm a very dichotomous person. It's one or the other. So when I see a problem with a piece of work that I'm doing or a project that I'm leading, I always go back to, is this a human issue or is this a aptitude issue? What I mean by that is this a misunderstanding of the requirements? Because oftentimes, I mean, maybe 50% of the time, that is the truth. There is no technical issue. It's just what's expected is not what was delivered, and it's a communication issue. And you want to work on that and build a partnership. So I think for that, but if it is a technical issue, separating out, to the individual components of it is a very good start. And also not being scared to get help, right? I think a lot of people, especially coders, are almost too proud and have too much of an ego to say, I'm the best coder in the company. I'm going to be able to solve it the best, right? And I think that's not, sometimes that is true. I'm not going to say that that's never true, but I think just getting someone else to look at your code and think about it is very powerful, because part of what I really preach is data storytelling. So if you can explain your complicated code to someone more junior than you, I think it's a great step to solidifying your own comprehension of the problem. Because many times you think you know it all, but it takes, almost a child's question, and, not to offend anyone, a child's question, like, oh, I didn't think about that, because your mind is so geared towards solving the problem versus someone else can take a step back or ask some very basic questions that you're like, I'm not very good at articulating what I'm doing. And that's part of being a good data engineer or data scientist, right? So why do I do this step? And being able to explain that, both through email or through just verbally speaking about it is a very powerful thing to be able to elevate you from just a coder to a leader in the community.
That's fair for sure. And I think stepping back and analyzing the problem, like Aman said, that we need to take a break and not get frustrated, and then discuss, ask questions, don't be shy about it. And if we do all these things, we can navigate any sort of challenging situations. So we have 8 minutes left, and I would want to wrap our conversation around the topic that it's important to have role models for sure. And Aman said in the start that in Pakistan, we didn't have a lot of female role models in the industry. And over time, we have seen that people have stepped up and there are more people coming and taking those roles. But how can we generally encourage people to become role models for people in the who are pursuing careers or are young? And how can we have a culture of mentorship imposed, or you can say encouraged, in our society? So I would ask Aman to go first and share her thoughts about it, and then probably Tian can go and share her thoughts.
I think there's an overemphasis on requiring like a mentor for your career. I think there have to be different mentors who mentor you for different aspects of your life or your career, whatever that is the case. And then I think being very specific about first what you require for them, I think, and laying that out, because at times I think we just go, our mentor is not really a therapist, right? Essentially, you just take everything and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do with my career. But you have to be very kind of mindful of what you're doing, where you're lacking, what your strengths are, what your fears are, and cataloging those. And then to going and approaching someone who you think would be a good fit, because you're also kind of asking for their time. So there has to be some sort of a value exchange and being very clear so that you don't waste their time in trying to just spend so much time trying to figure you out first as a person and what you require for them. So I think it's being very deliberate in approaching people, but then also being very clear, this is why I need your help. This is what I'm looking at. And then, having a coffee together after, whenever, this social isolating thing kind of goes away. But even like online coffee, or just kind of meeting more and more people. I feel like what Pakistani women in computing is doing is just putting Pakistani women role models out there. And I think that is super, super helpful, is being able to engage with them, not just on a one-on-one basis, but just collectively. Let's say you're mentoring. So I think to kind of make it optimal for other people as well is to mentor small groups of women or men, but having like groups that you can actually work together with. I think one of the things that's really been helpful for me, though, is I was a part of a mentorship program, which was 6 months with a mentor from the industry. And then the rest of the 6 months was another about 10 people from the industry within similar roles. And that has kind of gone on for another 2 years now. We still talk on WhatsApp, meet once a month, and kind of talk to each other about our problems, what we're facing at work. And I think that kind of model, I feel, is very, very successful.
Agreed, totally. Having a community around you who can support you is the best thing to do. And anyone who's starting off their careers, I think gel in with people who are more similar to you, people you can absorb information from. So completely agree with the idea of building up communities, and also taking the ownership yourself to make sure what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then going with the particular ask to these people or your mentors to get guidance or mentorship. Tian, what are your thoughts? We have 5 minutes, so very quickly, if in 3 minutes you can summarize this.
No problem. Yeah, like it is very important to have role models and mentors in this day and age, because I think there's just more and more paths you can go down, right? Because what's data analytics today, in 5 years, I guaranteed will be child's play in the future. So I think having a role model to really kind of be more forward-looking, right? I think in our day and age, what happens is we're so focused on what's happening next quarter, next year, that, especially for younger people, those are none of my concern. What happens in the next 2 quarters is not what's really going to set me up for success in my career. So really having role models and mentors who understand and can contextualize what's going on for more the long term is good, right? Because I think we got caught up in how do I get a better job in next 6 months, for example, versus how do I really think about, am I growing both my hard skills as well as my soft skills to be able to have the flexibility, right? And I think that's a key word I think as a good role model you want to be able to encourage, which is, don't pigeonhole yourself into being an analytics person. Look, analytics can mean a wide variety of things, and you want to have a role model who really kind of thinks about analytics as a language, not in terms of coding, but in terms of this is the way decisions are made in the future, and not being so nearsighted of how do I get a job that pays me 10% more or 20% more. To have that longer term vision, I think is very different. And the moves you make, whether you have a 5-year plan versus a 1-year plan, are very different typically.
Great. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I'm sure Eamon does as well. So that's about it. I think 3 minutes left. I would want to close the session with the thought that thank you so much for you guys to come over here and present your thoughts and share your opinions with our audience. Someone just posted a question which is like, tell me more about current situation of freelancer worldwide. If in 1 minute you both can summarize this, then we can
I'll let Tian go first.
Current situation of freelancers worldwide.
Worldwide, I think freelancing is becoming more and more popular, especially with offices, not requiring full-time, 9 to 5 in the office. I think it's a great way to get started. And I think, as a freelancer, it's very important to have the right sponsorship within the company, right? It's not just a transaction. You want your freelancing to become more of a partnership, because many times these people will hire you again and again. It's not just I deliver a good project, that's demanded. It's really building that trust and building a brand equity for yourself. I think that's how, as a freelancer, you really separate yourself. It's building that brand equity, because look, you're a freelancer, you're selling a brand, no different than a photographer or a wedding caterer, anything like that. So I think the environment with our teleconferencing is right for freelancers to do well.
Awesome. Aman, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly what Tian said. And I think the trust on remote workers and freelancers is going to increase as well now that everyone's doing it. I think, and now we're trying to figure out what makes, what's more effective working remotely. So I think a lot of the trust that people probably didn't have before in people working remotely will probably increase. So I think that's something, it's a good sign for freelancers.
So the answer to this question is that the freelancing is good and there will be more opportunities for you. So keep doing that. Lastly, I would just want to end the session now. Thanks to Aman and Tian for joining our sessions and being available at such a short notice. I'm really thankful to you on behalf of PWiC and the Global Pakistan Summit team as well. And that's about it, guys. Any last word? Anything you want to say? If not, we can just sign off.
No, thank you so much for having us, Mariam. This has been great, and I hope that people kind of were able to extract some value out of what we were able to deliver today.
Same.
Yeah,
All right,
really
guys.
appreciate being here. Take care, guys.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Tian has to say Pakistan Zindabad, though.
Yeah, we taught him a word. Go ahead, do it.
Pakistan Zindabad.
Yay. All right, bye-bye, guys.
And take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye, everyone.